There has been a growing push for workplaces and public spaces to provide free menstrual products in washrooms, which on the surface seems like a pretty straightforward improvement. At the same time, once you move past the initial decision to provide them, there can be a surprising amount of complexity around where they're available and how people actually feel accessing them. In some cases, it can also become unexpectedly controversial, especially when the conversation turns to products appearing in spaces that people don't traditionally associate with menstruation, such as men's washrooms. I'm so glad to be here with Kai. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. How about yourself?
I'm very hot, Kai. I feel very, very hot. And I think
Is
that
it
might
like
be...
the sun's coming in?
I think
or...
if the sun is coming in, I'm feeling slightly flustered from having to do the intro. And
Right.
I'm feeling sort of overwhelmingly hot. But if I take my hat off, I'm going to look like a wild person. So I just have to remain hot.
A multitude of sins.
Oh, you have no idea. But I'm good. Aside from that, I'm great.
Excellent.
It feels like in the last few years, we've started seeing menstrual products appear more often in public washrooms and workplaces and things like that. When people picture who is needing those products, they're most likely thinking about women. And so we see that in the language it's also being used too. It's not just menstrual products. Often it's sort of framed as feminine products, or there's just this sort of a lot of weight on this being something for women. And so I wanted to first, I feel like that's a place to start where we can just go into why that's not exactly accurate.
Yes. And just thinking about being mindful of the type of language that we use, right? Obviously, for the majority of users, it's going to be cis women. So we're not necessarily discounting that or trying to veer away from that or anything. But we are trying to widen the circle a little bit to include other genders that also menstruate, and where maybe it's not initially visible to folks that, say, for example, trans men who are assigned female at birth, or even non-binary folks who are also assigned female at birth. All of these people also menstruate, but they're not necessarily accessing women's spaces, and so may not have direct access to the products that are trying to be provided, right? So of course you're going to put them in women's spaces, understandably so, given that the majority of folks who are going to be using them are cisgender women, but not to lose sight of, another population that typically gets underserved, especially when we're talking about what is commonly named period poverty, right? So people who need access to these free products because they are so expensive. And when we think about trans and non-binary folks, they are overly represented in the lower socioeconomic bracket. And so wanting to address period poverty should include them as well, given the socioeconomic challenges.
So a lot of organizations are starting to put menstrual products in men's spaces as well as all gender spaces and women's spaces. We are seeing that that happen. And I don't know if it's surprising or not. I was going to say unsurprisingly, but I don't know if that's entirely fair. But we are seeing some backlash to that. A lot of people can be quite upset about seeing that happen. So I wanted to get your thoughts on why it is seen as so controversial. Like, what's the big deal? is my question.
Right. Fair. So yeah, the menstrual products showing up in men's spaces, we have seen time and time again in the work that we've done with clients and just media articles that we read. It's creates because sometimes this tremendous amount of backlash, and sometimes that takes the well-meaning organizations aback. They're like, holy crap, we didn't expect this type of virulent, hostile treatment towards menstrual products in men's spaces. It can show up as vandalism. So people marking all kinds of things on the dispensing units. It can mean completely removing them at all. It can be comments shared, usually anonymously, whether on social media or through comment avenues, and basically just very hostile. Why are these products in these spaces? It doesn't make sense. We don't need them. sometimes I feel that because it's lumped in with femininity, and oftentimes some, although very few, maybe not very few, but fewer uh, men have a desire for establishing masculinity in ways where any hint of what in their minds is femininity is like an affront to some degree,
Right.
right? Um, and it can come out in very strong ways that for the products that they are and that they don't apply to them, you just kind of leave them, like
Right. Yeah.
that would be a healthy response. But given that
Right.
there's so much wrapped up in our society these days, it can come out in different ways. And so it's really important for organizations to be aware of this type of backlash, because it doesn't just fall on the organization, it actually gets redirected and can often fall on trans and non-binary folks. So
Right.
if they're known in the organization, then people can be like, well, because of you, now we have ridiculous things like menstrual products in men's spaces. And that can make it further hard or difficult or traumatic to be trans in the workplace, or
Yeah,
at school
absolutely.
or wherever else they're implementing this type of approach.
I had a conversation with somebody this week about
Oh, yeah.
menstrual products and men's washrooms. Yeah, funnily enough. It was a conversation of a cis guy who has a teenage daughter who had her first period in the mall, and they had
Hmm.
free menstrual products and
Ah.
having a panic. And he was able to quickly jump into the guy's washroom, grab a pad, and then bring it to her so that she could be in like I don't know, there was just like a really beautiful dynamic there. It's not actually just about you personally, whether you need it. There are people who do need it, but there is also a caregiving element where it extends
Mm-hmm.
beyond just trans people. This is like there are a lot of uses for this.
Oh my gosh, I love that story so much. It's such a
Mm-hmm.
perfect illustration that, yeah, sure, the driver might be trans and non-binary folks in the men that use men's washrooms, but at the end of the day, it can also help cisgender men be there for the people who are menstruating in their lives, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
that this involves them too, because
Mm-hmm.
it, menstruation is not like, I don't know, that we have very distorted notions of menstruation in our society in general.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we can get everyone kind of more comfortable, one, it happens, and two,
Mm-hmm.
we need to support folks, whether we personally experience it or not.
Right.
And how can we be there, and what can we do to make that possible from an organizational and individual level?
And presumably there were also free products in the women's washrooms, but I think she was just having a panic. So
Well,
I think
there's that, but sometimes they can be out in the women's
right.
space too, right? Because they're more heavily used there than, say, in the underutilized men's spaces, right? So it's just
Mm-hmm.
like there's practicalities to this,
Mm-hmm.
and that even an adult has a much easier time accessing and making things happen when somebody
Mm-hmm.
is emotionally maybe not has the wherewithal to do that at that moment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's just there's so much to it, and yeah, that's such a great story, and I'm glad he was able to be there for his daughter.
Yeah, me too. Um, you've mentioned before, not on the podcast, but in a conversation that we've had about how some organizations they're starting to provide these menstrual products, and in some cases they are starting to become legally required.
Mm-hmm.
And I think lots of people within organizations can be pretty excited about inclusivity and wanting to kind of extend
Sure.
that. But there are a lot of things to consider as well. And before I get to those considerations, I kind of want to ask you about what providing access can look like, given
Mm.
that there are so many different types of washrooms and approaches, and there is no sort of one size fits all.
Yeah, so there's different types of washrooms in various organizations. It can there's it varies. So
Mm-hmm.
some just have men's and women's multi-stall spaces or washrooms or change rooms. Others might have a single unit washroom. Others might have all gender multi-stall, right? So it's like all these different configurations that need to be considered. And it's not quite a blanket approach to all of them, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
each one needs to be treated kind of unto its own and may have modifications involved. the easiest one is women's washrooms, just because it's already built in. People expect to see it there, or that those products there. There's already a process of dispensing and disposing, and there's a flow, there's a culture, etc. Right? So
Right.
the no brainer, continue as usual. You have the single unit washrooms, which they're fully self-contained washroom, toilet, a sink, and that's where perhaps there's a slightly different way of doing it. Maybe it's a dispensing unit, right, that you can access for free, or maybe you put it in a bin and then label it. There's a few different ways of going about it, but it's just making sure that it's easy to notice and know kind of how to access. So that's one other thing. So also still pretty simple, even, but maybe slightly different from what's happening in the women's spaces. Then you have and I would say similarly with all gender multi-stall, there, because it's like a shared space, especially in the sink area, I would try to figure out private ways to access those so that you're not kind of putting a spotlight effect. I think people are used to grabbing for things in a shared setting in the women's, but in an all gender space, it might be more or less difficult for some people, even for cisgender women in the presence of cisgender men to grab for those types of products. So
Yeah.
I think that's another one where you want to think it through. Maybe it's in there, but maybe there's a more private, semi-private area that you can put it in, or another location altogether. And we can talk about that a little bit later on. So the last one is men's spaces or washrooms and change rooms. And the automatic go-to of all the organizations that we've seen is that they pretty much copy and paste from what's in the women's, right?
Right.
They'll put it in a bin, or there's a dispensing unit, and somehow the dispensing unit makes it more kind of permanent in a way that really provokes anger. And
Really?
also, yeah, I would say so,
Why?
rather than a bin. Well, if you think about there's not like, there have been dispensing units in men's spaces, but they have been other varieties of things that are dispensed.
Right.
Probably not in a workplace, but there are
Yeah.
dispensing of condoms, right? As an example. Other things I'm trying to think of right now, don't ring a bell, but that's the one product that I can remember. And so it's almost this in probably, I'm just trying to imagine, so I don't know this, actually, is this kind of like swap of like, okay, we're not providing condoms, but we're providing menstrual products. So from something
Right.
that's highly relevant to them to something that is not relevant to them, or even possibly threatening. And so it's like, it's just, yeah, and it's just not feeling like one belongs, in a sense of like things are not oriented towards me anymore. And I think that can be destabilizing, in a broader context of feeling destabilized, right? What's my role in society? And like, I don't want to get too deep into the psychology because I'm guessing, and I don't want to like
Yeah.
go beyond what is my scope.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've read and listened, and so I do have some context for sharing, but I always want to make it very contextualized. All that to say, dispensing units, if they're like bolted to the wall and they're like those metal units that you get things out of, as opposed to putting something in a bin that's a little bit more temporary feeling, even if it's around for most of the time, it does have a quality difference to it.
One of the things that might surprise people is that a lot of trans guys and non-binary people might not like those approaches very much. I think a lot of the
What?
time people are like, well,
Shocker.
this is great for trans people, and it is great for trans people, but there's a little bit more to think about when it comes to supporting trans people for what they actually need and want when it comes to accessing these products.
Yeah. The intention is certainly a good one, right? We want to provide access. Let's put it in the men's and then we're done. When in reality, I mean, I'll talk from my own personal experience. Not that I've ever reached for menstrual products in men's spaces, but if I were to, that's not the place I would want to go to get those, right?
100%. Yeah.
especially since most of the dispensing is done out in a shared space. So usually it's near the sink, right?
Mm.
And especially in a smaller washroom, if I'm grabbing for a menstrual product and then heading into the stall, like that's too visible. That
Right.
could essentially out me if people are paying attention. Sometimes they're just baffled. They're like, "Why did that guy just reach for that menstrual product?
Right.
That's weird." Sometimes it's as basic as that. Other times they're
Hmm.
like, "Oh, okay, it's a trans guy," and then we're in a confined space where
Hmm.
I don't know my level of safety, and that can be very concerning and disconcerting for folks in ways
Hmm.
that are just a non-starter. I would say for many, if not most,
Right.
of trans men and non-binary folks, it's just like, nope, I'll figure out some other way, or make sure somebody
Hmm.
will just make sure they have a supply, right, rather than having to
Right.
tap into. But then again, it doesn't solve the socioeconomic problem it's trying to address,
Hmm.
by providing these materials or products. So yeah, men's spaces, even if people use them, it might not be the best place to provide those, or at the very least are not the only location those should be provided.
Hmm. And I have seen uh, options available, which would be to um, go to the front desk to
Mhm.
access the products from there. And
Yep.
I actually didn't consider you. We were planning this last week, and you mentioned
Mhm.
something which I had really not considered, which is about that sort of the approach that maybe some people on the front desk might have if a guy came up to ask for
Right.
some menstrual products. I really hadn't considered that, and I was wondering if you could
Yeah.
go into that too.
Yeah. So access points beyond washrooms are important to consider. So I appreciate why organizations have gone to front desk, because that's
Mm,
often where people go to ask questions and ask for things, and if something's lost, or so there's a
mhm,
context for going to the front desk. But then you also have to consider what societal expectations a front desk staff member might have about who should access these or be asking for these. So if
mm,
somebody feminine walks up, no problem. They're like, yeah, of course, here you go, right? If somebody more masculine appears, suddenly it's like, why are you asking for these?
mm,
There might be a scenario like your friend who's asking for somebody else, but there's not a context in which people might understand that a masculine appearing person could be asking about it for themselves.
mhm,
And so that puts somebody in a difficult spot of like having to either out themselves or come up with some fake story, and it's just more work. And
mm,
that gatekeeping is, even if it's not intended as gatekeeping, just produces even more kind of things in people's roads that they
mm.
just don't need that extra labor, right? So it's already difficult enough because for
Right.
some,
Yeah.
this is having a period, not for everybody, but for some trans and non-binary folks, this is a very dysphoric experience. And
Mm,
so that they would, in addition to having this very distressing experience, then to also have to be gate kept, or have to reach for something in front of other men, like
mm.
it just adds way more to the equation. And it just, I don't know how to convey how difficult that is. It's like
Yeah.
hugely emotionally taxing, and one where it's easy for trans and non-binary folks to choose isolation, because then you don't have to deal with all of this. And so
Mm,
there's so many like complex decisions that trans people are navigating, and if they're too much, then people resort to not coming. And so
mhm.
if those things can be removed or improved, then that at least gets it better to where people can want to participate at the very least. Yeah.
Um, on that, is it all right with you if you kind of further explain what gender dysphoria is then?
Mm,
And you've
right.
described this sort of distress, but I think that's
Hmm.
maybe a new concept for a
Hmm.
lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So gender dysphoria is the experience of distress or discomfort, extreme discomfort, with
Mm,
one's body and or social roles based on gender, that don't match one's gender identity. And so
mhm,
There are so many different aspects to it. And then I know we're specifically talking about menstruation, but for some, even many trans and non-binary folks, female assigned at birth, the fact that one menstruates, even yeah, I don't know how deep to go into this. There's a lot of layers,
Yeah.
but the fact that one menstruates can be very distressing. Some people through hormone therapy can reduce or completely eliminate menstruation. There's obviously surgeries as well, but sometimes even if one takes hormones, the menstruation can suddenly come back, which
Mm-hmm.
can be very distressing because it's unexpected.
Mm.
And so it's just there's a lot of challenge related to it for some.
Mm-hmm.
For some, it's okay and it's just a normal part of their bodily function, and they go about it in a matter of fact way. But for some, it can be a lot. And like I said, either they're coming and having to navigate all this additional challenge related to menstruation because society doesn't expect men to menstruate,
Mm.
or they choose to isolate because it's too much to manage.
So when people are experiencing this sort of extreme discomfort around menstruation, they're experiencing this gender dysphoria to then be faced with like having to go into the men's washroom and get their sort of like their products dispensed in front of everybody. It's already uncomfortable even when they're on their own. So to then
Mm-hmm.
add the sort of feeling of like now everybody knows or everybody's watching me, even if that's not true, it's just I think everybody can like understand that to some extent of feeling like discomfort
Yep.
about something and then feeling as though you're now spotlit with that thing that you're uncomfortable with. But then
Mm-hmm.
taking that to a whole other level with dysphoria, it's like it can be so
Yeah.
debilitating for so many people.
Oh, for sure. And to another extent, whether internally spoken to oneself or externally by somebody, another man, it could
Mm-hmm.
be a way to question somebody's manhood, right? A trans
Right.
person's manhood, right? It's like you're
Mm-hmm.
not really a man because you menstruate, like people make
Mm.
those kind of biological equivalencies that really harm and make it difficult to just be one's gender, right? So,
Mhm.
um, so yeah, making that really visible is for some okay, for others maybe they would try it, but for others just a non-starter.
So there are also other things to consider. You've mentioned to me before about how organizations have considered dispensing the products, but then they haven't really thought about what will then happen and how
Mm-hmm.
people are meant to sort of dispose of those products or yeah, deal with them in that way. And I was wondering kind of what you've seen with that and what options are available.
Yeah,
I mean, presumably
it's
bins.
right. Shocker.
Yeah.
um, but that's the thing. I mean, people don't realize that there are concrete differences between men's and women's washrooms. Sure, they might
Mhm.
be kind of mirror images of them of each other, maybe structurally, but not everything is um, available. In especially
Mhm.
men's are a bit more stripped down versions of women's spaces. Again, I don't know why that is. I have my theories, but that makes things very complicated. From a so we've so say somebody has the product, has used it, and there are byproducts, and now what do you do with that, right? And for example, in women's spaces, there are bins that people can throw those items in within the stall, right? So it's
Mhm.
very private disposal of those products, which even in a women's space, you don't want to be parading outside in
No.
shared spaces, like, daintily dropping it into the shared bin, right? Like, so there's reason why they've been put in the stalls, the small
Mhm.
little bins or the little like ones that you can open on the side of the stall unit. But those are absent, completely absent in men's spaces. And I would say that that is an oversight, not just in this instance with menstrual products, but there's a whole bunch of private things that I imagine men want to dispose of, cisgender
Mhm.
men. So I'm kind of baffled that it's not already available, but it isn't. And so then when somebody has a product, they've used it, they have byproduct, what are they supposed to do with that? And that's when they're having to bring that out into the shared space and dispose of it. So it's not just in the like grabbing of it, it's also in the coming out, and just people noticing and either figuring it out or being bewildered in some way, right? Or having to be like really awkward about hiding what one is disposing of, which can create its own dynamics of like, what are you hiding? So it's just generally bizarre. It's not a great experience. So the bins in the stalls are really important.
I just had like a real flashback of being a teenager and needing to get a tampon from my friend and being so horrified in the classroom and hiding it up my sleeve to go.
Totally. Yep,
Why is it so embarrassing? I was like mortified by like. Well, I'm obnoxious about it now, as I think you probably know. I like overshared to that.
Traffic
like,
controlling.
No, everyone will know. I will make damn clear.
I love it. Yeah.
But like, yeah, when I was a teenager, I would hide them up my sleeves and like try not to rustle and make any noise or whatever. So strange.
Right. That's great. Another thing. Oh my gosh. I mean, some of these are buried memories for me, but the rustling with these products, let me tell you, okay, it's like extra crinkly for some reason, and so like,
and it's always like, when the washroom is so quiet, like people could be using hand dryers, coughing, and then suddenly the minute a sanitary towel comes out
and you're like
and everyone's like, deathly quiet. And not only that, there's a queue and everybody's in there. Like the entire the entire
Chock-a-block
mall
full.
is in there. The whole school has come to the washroom. Yes, those are my experiences too.
Dang, that's so true. I forgot about the volume, like the audio element to this. It's a real thing, and nobody else is making those types of sounds in men's spaces. Let me tell you. So,
well, I told you this when we were planning it, but there was a story of a friend of mine who's a trans guy. Was it? I don't know if the friend of mine was just telling me a story of someone else, actually. So somebody that I know told me this story of a trans guy in a men's washroom. Trying to get access to his menstrual products, and it was rustling around, and the guy in the next door was like, you're having a hard time if you're having to bring snacks with you.
Opening a bag of crisps.
That's what I think they thought was going on in there. But the sound is I mean, now again, I'm obnoxious about it, but like at the time when I was younger, horrifying. And I can see how that would be like really tough for a trans guy in an environment like that, where you're just like, it's already tense. So campaign to make silent products, please.
Silent products, soundproof rooms, or stalls. A whole number of things where it's just like, or like add nice audio to the washrooms,
please,
little background noise, I think the funny thing about the survey we did with one of the universities, where we had 3,000 respondents, so it's robust data here, and a big thing was sound, and people were like, please, we need to cover up our biological functioning here, especially I'm sure one form that everyone can recognize. And so, I was like, that's smart. And that would help with the crinkle bags with menstrual products.
So what's the answer then? When it comes to dealing with this? How do we provide access? In a way that's like nice for trans people, or as nice as possible.
Right. And safe too. I mean, there's a few things to consider. So I think it is context specific. We're talking a range of different places: recreation centers, schools, hockey rinks, and you name it. Right? There's different office settings, right? So each space has its own set of considerations. The thing is that providing them within the washrooms is one place, but then thinking alternative places as well. So one example in say a university setting is that the menstrual products could be shared within like a health clinic, right? Where they're already going for certain things, And in addition, now you see and have availability of these menstrual products. As an example, we talked about the front desk within a recreation setting. Within an office setting, there might be like a little quiet area where you can put a few different kind of personal items. I wouldn't have that be the only thing. I would just kind of make it a personal space, so people are going to that space for different reasons. So that kind of masks or covers up or privatizes what somebody might be going there for, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's all kinds of things that could improve the mental, physical health of employees. And the important thing being it's a quieter space kind of off of main high traffic areas where people can go and access them. And it's maybe not abundantly clear what they're going for if there's a few different bowls, as an example. So there's that. And then I think it's also looking at the culture of the place to better understand how cisgender men might react to menstrual products in men's spaces. So in certain settings, no big deal, whatever. If it's not relevant to me, I'm just passing over and not spending a lot of time on it. Versus in other spaces, people losing their lovely minds,
sweet minds. Yeah.
like, and I don't want to like pick out any one or the other because I think those are present in many different industries. So we kind of can't pigeonhole this onto any one sector. But I think it's being honest about the culture of a place and the readiness of cis men to receive that type of or see that type of menstrual product. Now, there are ways to anticipate it where we have done surveys, not specific to menstrual products, but we've included questions about menstrual products to kind of get a temperature read before doing something. So you can see if people are losing their minds or NBD, no big deal. So where along the spectrum are you at? It's just so that there's no unpleasant surprises. Because unfortunately, if organizations just test it out, then the cost is borne by the trans and non-binary folks who are either witnessing, hearing, or whatever, right? We don't want that to be the case. And probably catching organizations off guard. So I think it's worth a beat to explore that from a cultural perspective.
You mentioned the cost of this being borne by trans people, and I was hoping, would you mind going into what that actually looks like and what that means? That the idea that the sort of blame is put on the trans people as opposed to just it being a thing that exists.
Yeah. So it can come in all different varieties of pushback or backlash on trans people. It can be more mild, like jokes or comments or like, oh, look at us, being woke, or something.
Right.
Like that's not really mild. That's also problematic. But, and then to all the way to the more extreme side of the vandalism piece, like observing a vandalized set of products that I need access to. That's distressing. It shows that because it takes somebody some sort of activation energy to vandalize something. And so that can show there's kind of a violent undercurrent that could be redirected onto a person, right? Even if it doesn't, even the threat of that can be very unsettling for folks.
Yeah.
And then there's also a piece of if trans people aren't out at work as being trans, and then people talking amongst themselves about the menstrual products, not knowing that there's a trans person in their midst. We've actually heard a few stories of that. And then people get to hear the inner monologue of, this is ridiculous. There's no such thing as men who menstruate. These people are mentally ill. Like it goes on and on. Like I don't need to repeat everything, but it gives you a flavor of just the kinds of very hostile commentary that people feel free to talk about, mainly because they think they're only talking to cis people, but there's a trans person there. And then that person will never come out. Just like lock and seal that door, or maybe they even leave because this is not a place they want to be.
So what kind of work does Transfocus do when it comes to this?
Yes. So we can definitely help out organizations with this type of work. It's usually part of a larger scope around washrooms and change rooms, but certainly figuring out where to put menstrual products, especially we look at layouts of floor plans or do site visits that really help us to zero in on exactly the good places. We also help with communications around this, because we find if people are set up well to be like, okay, I understand what this is about, so I'm not going to freak out if I see it,
Right.
before they're put in the places, that can often kind of smooth things over, make things easier. Of course, we can do surveys and all kinds of other stuff. So, whether it's before, during, or after, we're there to support folks in this process, whether it's around just menstrual products or a wider scope of washrooms and change rooms. So we've created a resource just because this has come up kind of a few different, maybe not a few, a lot. People wondering what to do and how to consider things and what are the issues, some of what we've covered here today. And so we've put that in a resource with a checklist to help you kind of think that through within your organization. Even if you're not going to engage trans focus, it allows you to be a bit more thoughtful, intentional about this without creating additional harm for trans and non-binary folks. And we hope it's a super helpful resource for your journey of inclusion on this topic.
Well, thank you so much, Kai.
Yeah, thank you.
See you next week.
Yeah, bye for now.